All right, we got it.
All right, perfect. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it. And I imagine with the various weather issues around the country, for some of you, especially in the cold north, this might be a good diversion from all the stuff you're dealing with. So, at any rate, we're glad you're here. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Nick Pinizzato. I'm the president and CEO of the National Deer Association. And on behalf of the NDA, I just want to welcome you to the webinar. My comments will be brief here, but we're excited to bring you the key points of the 2023 Deer Report. Believe it or not, this is the 15th year that we've been doing this report, which is pretty awesome. And so why do we do it? You might be asking yourself that. And really just the main reasons are to help you stay informed about the threats and concerns and things, basically everything going on in the deer world, what's shaping the future of wild deer, what's going on out there. And so we don't leave many stones unturned either. This is a very, very detailed report. For those of you that have seen this before and thumbed through it, I mean, there's a lot of great detail in there. And it continues to grow in popularity, which we're excited about. We know that our state wildlife agencies enjoy getting it, and just a lot of individuals request it and download it. And so it's very popular, which is a good thing. And we'd like to call this evening really sort of our State of the Deer address, if you will. And it's for hunters, landowners, natural resource professionals, or the media, anybody who's interested in deer. And I can't imagine anybody not being interested in deer. Maybe I'm a little bit biased there. I do want to take a second, though, and specifically thank Kip and Matt, who really lead this effort up. But I do want to mention that the production of this report literally touches every department in our organization one way or another. So I just want to make a note that, or thank the staff of the National Deer Association for all their hard work in putting this together, and also to the state wildlife agencies who we reach out to for this information. That is a burden on them as well to provide us that information, and they've been doing it, and we have a really good return rate on that. So thank you to everybody who had a hand in producing the 2023 report. So with that, I promised I'd be brief. I will hand it over to your master of ceremonies for the evening, Mr. Matt Ross. So Matt, take it away.
Thanks, Nick, and good evening again, everybody. So I'm Matt Ross. I'm the Director of Conservation, one of the authors of the report. Thinking back, 15 years, the history of this report has it's changed. I'm really pleased at how much it gets used and how many people view it and use it. One of the things we realized over the years developing it, though, is that it's a lot of information, and every report is different. I got them on my bookshelf behind me. I tried to jump in there and look for different things as the desktop reference, but a few years ago, we realized that we need to make it a little bit more user-friendly. So there's also a searchable index on the Deer Report website page that if you're ever wondering what a topic, if we've ever looked at it or investigated it, you can just go into that searchable index and look by name, and it has direct links to all 15 of the reports. That's just been updated by one of our conservation interns, so that's really useful. And coming soon, a little bit later this year, we're planning some new things that are related to the Deer Report that are interactive, that lets you search and see things in a whole different way. So make sure you look at the Deer Report webpage later this year. A little bit of housekeeping for tonight. We are recording this for later viewing on YouTube, on our YouTube channel. So if you missed something, you want to review it, if you want to pass it on to one of your friends or family members just so that they can see it and they're not here tonight, go to our YouTube channel next week and you'll be able to see it there. And we actually put all of our prior webinars on our YouTube channel. We used to do a beer and deer webinar series. This is a little bit of a Thursday throwback, I guess, of coming back to you with a Thursday night webinar. And you can view any of those on our YouTube channel, as well as a whole bunch of content. We're going to have a main presentation by Kip Adams. I'll introduce him in a second. And it's going to be followed by a Q&A. And so one thing that you can do, of course, you can chat with each other in the chat portion of the webinar feature at the bottom of your screen. You'll see a call out or a bubble that says chat under it. And if you use that, you can chat with each other. But if you want to ask a question to myself or Kip or Nick or any of the authors about the Deer Report or about the presentation, use the Q&A feature. And I can see there's already a couple in there. So we're going to try to go through as many as we can in the time allotted. We're also going to have a prize giveaway at the end, similar to what we've done with some of our past webinars. So stay tuned to the very last minute. We'll give something away. One thing I do want to mention before we start here, though, for you, if you're really interested in deer, you're sitting here enjoying all this information. We just launched our brand new Deer Steward 1 course, which is an online format of instruction about learning about deer, habitat management, population management, all kinds of things. It's actually designed so that if you go through Deer Steward, I can see actually we have some Deer Steward graduates. I recognize some names in the attendee list. You'll be able to write and implement your own deer management plan. And we just launched that. It's our 3rd version. We've been doing that for a period of time as well. And if you register now, we have less than 100 spots that are getting 35% off. It's our 35th anniversary this year, and that's about a $90 savings. So if you've never taken Deer Steward, you go to the NDA website tonight, you type in at the promo code or at the point of checkout NDA 35, and you'll save 35% off, which is nearly $90 off of registration. So want to make sure I tell folks that if you enjoy deer management, deer biology, try to take advantage of that before we run out of spots. It's the first 350 people that register, and there's less than 100 left. And so with that, I'm going to introduce Kip. Kip, if you could set it to speaker view so people see your cute mug there. Hey, I'm biased.
Gotcha.
And I'm going to introduce Kip. Kip is our Chief Conservation Officer. He is a certified wildlife biologist. Kip got his bachelor's degree at Penn State University, his master's at University of New Hampshire. That's where we met, actually. I've known Kip for over 20 years. He worked as the deer and bear project leader for the New Hampshire Fish and Game Department. When I was going to graduate school, we've told that story a number of times. Before that, he worked for the Florida Game and Fish Commission for a period of time as a wildlife biologist. And he's been with NDA now, originally QDMA, for how many years, Kip?
Man, it was 20 years last August, so like 20 and a half now.
Look at that, 20th anniversary. You have arrived, and he's known as the face of the NDA. We all love Kip. Kip's going to share his screen, so he will lead us through the presentation, but we're going to have some fun commentary back and forth, and I'll make sure that I monitor the Q&A feature for asking Kip questions, and I may answer a few as well. So, Kip, the floor is yours.
All right, thanks, Matt. And yeah, it's fun to think, relative to the deer report, looking all the way back to the very first one that we did. And, I can remember you and me and Mr. Joe sitting in a room together, just kind of talking through that and laying that out, and, how different it is today from that. And the information is still incredibly valuable. The intent of it's the same, but it's been fun to watch, kind of the theme of that over the years, how it's changed, and the focus of some of the, the hot topics. So it's been fun for sure. It's hard to believe that, we've done 15 of them now. So pretty cool. I'm proud of it. And you know what? In the early years, it really was me and you and Mr. Joe wrote all of it, or 99% of it anyway. And it's really rewarding now that it is a full staff effort. All the conservation staff write stuff, certainly communications has a huge role in laying this out and making it look cool. So from an NDA staff standpoint, it's really neat to be a part of it. So, and I'm very proud to get to talk about this tonight, kind of bring the highlights of some of this. But what I'd like to do, Matt, as we go through here is, I've pulled out some of this, and obviously we don't have everything here that's in the report. That would just take too long. But as we go through, there are certain chapters that I know that you wrote or that you had a heavy hand in. So, at any point, feel free to add some dialogue to something we have, because I think what folks want to see is they can read all this in the report, but they want to see our interpretation of it in many cases as well. And certainly you and I can go deep on some of the different aspects here, some of the different issues, and relay, regional differences, et cetera. And in my opinion, that makes it a lot of fun and even more rewarding for the attendees. So as we go through, you and I can have a good dialogue and have some fun with this.
I agree. And I'll tell the audience, a lot of this starts with Kip and I thinking and sitting down and saying, I wonder why we didn't know this about deer. If you've ever had one of those thoughts or questions, feel free to email Kip or I and say, have you guys ever looked into this? This actually came up recently. A state agency asked us if we had ever investigated something. We hadn't. And so it's probably going to be a question on a future report. You could have the same thought and it could affect a future report. So we don't know everything about deer, and we're certainly still learning a lot, but I do enjoy developing it, and it's an open forum. So if you have an idea, let us know.
Sounds great. And yeah, and we're still working on our grammar, right, Matt? It's Kip and me, not Kip and
Oh
I.
man.
Mr. Joe will be proud. All right, let's get going. Let's see what we have here. Thanks for attending here, everybody. I hope that you enjoy this. And just so you know, everything that I'm going to talk about is included in our 2023 deer report. This is the cover. All of these are free downloads on our website. So you can go to deerassociation.com and get any of these. All of the data in part one of this, and part one is all the harvest stuff, numbers of bucks and does shot, age structures, all of that. Every piece of that comes from the state wildlife agencies. For 15 years now, we send a national survey out every September. We get with the state wildlife agencies. They're the ones that provide all of this information. We put it together and combine it in here. So all of part one are from the states. Most of part two, when part two is the biggest issues and the current trends. So all of part one and the vast majority of part two are data that come from that Deer Project Leader Survey. So certainly a tip of my hat to all of the Deer Project leaders across the country participating with this, helping us get this data together so that we can compile it and analyze it, interpret it, and then write it for you. So everything I say, though, is in this report, and certainly encourage you to grab it after the fact. I'll tell you, though, from a regional standpoint, we have state-by-state data for all of this stuff, or at least all the ones that the states provide us, but we regionalize this as well. And tonight during this, I'm going to talk about this in the course of regions. And we do this loosely based on the affiliations of these states to their regional deer meetings that they have. So as you can see, the Northeast, the Midwest, the Southeast, and the West. We also are getting more data from Canada than we've had in the past. So where we can get enough provincial data, we include that as well, because that's fun to take a look at that. And you can see on here where this black line is, the north-south line that's right here at the east of the Rocky Mountains. There are 37 states that are east of that make up the three regions, the Midwest, the Northeast, and the Southeast. The neat thing about it is we have long-term data from those three regions, and those three regions are home to about 97% of all the whitetails in the U.S. They're home to the vast majority of the hunters as well. So most of what I talk about tonight, I'll reference three regions. These are the ones that we're talking about, because the West, although we get much better data now than we've had in the past, some of those states cannot tease out their difference in whitetail versus mule deer harvest. So we just get a total deer harvest from them. So all the whitetail harvest data that I share, we have really, really good data from these three regions east of the Rocky Mountains. So we'll keep that in mind. But these are the regions that I'll be talking about. Well, one of the first things that we look at, Matt, and man, we have been doing this for 30 years now at NDA, is the percentage of all the bucks that are shot out there, the percentage that are just 1.5 years old. This is one of the premises of the whole QDM philosophy and the whole QDM movement. And what we saw in the 2021 into 22 harvest, and I will say this, that is the most recent deer season. They have all the data together that can be provided to us. So, for example, we published our 2023 deer report in January. Most states still had the 2022 deer season still going on. So this is the most complete season that is in here. So that's why we're talking about this data. So of all the antlered bucks that were shot, only 27% of them were 1.5 years old, which is amazing. It is a very small percentage. And this is near the lowest national average ever reported. Matt, when we started doing this percentage was, double or more than that. And so many states were right on the cusp of, learning about QDM, and hunters were learning about this new management philosophy. We're at a very different place today. And in fact, if you look at a national graph from 1989 to now, and QDMA, or now NDA, was born or was established in 1988. So essentially, this is our organization's history here. This is all of the national deer harvest, buck harvest. 62% of it were 1.5 years old back when we started. And that's all the way down to now. And you can see how we've had a huge drop in this. And even over the last few years, this has pretty much bottomed out at just over 1/4 of the total deer harvest. And I'll say this, this is a great place to be. This is a very healthy place to be. We don't need to go to zero with this. This allows very good age structure on the landscape so that we have bucks in all age classes to photograph, to scout, to hunt, still be able to take some yearling bucks. And there's certainly nothing wrong with taking yearling bucks. The problems with this was when you took the majority of yearling bucks every year. That hasn't happened in a long time, and that's pretty cool. Well, the other half of this, then, we always take a look at is a percentage of the total buck harvest that are at least 3.5 years old. Might be 3, 4, 5, 6 or older. We group this all together. The percentage in the same year was 40%, which is crazy. And this is near the highest national average ever reported. And what this means that today is across the whitetails range, hunters now shoot far more bucks that are at least 3.5 years old than those that are just 1.5. This is a monumental switch in what we have from a harvest standpoint, which then obviously means that it's a monumental switch from what we have for a standing crop of deer and just what the average hunter has available today to photograph, to hunt, to pursue. So pretty cool. We're in a good spot. And actually, if we just take a look from 2001 to now, I'll overlay, Matt, both of these on this graph. This is the percentage of all the buckshot that are 1.5 years old. So from 2001 to 2021, and you can see how this has dropped. But the cool part of this is when we overlay the percentage of the buck harvest that was 3.5 or older, we passed those yearlings for the first time in 2015. And since then, we continue to harvest more of these older bucks, and the gap continues to widen a little bit. So very, very different over the last 3 seasons for sure than at any point in our history. And here in the United States, we have an incredibly rich deer hunting in history, deer culture that we have, but it is very different today. We have the single best age structure in bucks that we have had in at least the last 150 years across the United States. And this is a direct result of our organization teaching people the value of QDM and passing young bucks, state wildlife agencies teaching people the value of that, and just a whole hunting culture that has become more knowledgeable than ever before about deer biology and deer management. So we're all in this together, and we've all had a piece of this. Very different than in the past, and a very exciting place to be. And I'm sure you'll agree with that.
I do. And I know that we've used this as a measuring stick to a degree of the success of the organization and the success of hunters, really, about changing the face of hunting. But we've also talked about recently, as things started to bottom out, that was probably going to be where it stayed, right? And we've said that on record with some media that we didn't think it was going to go much lower. And some of the reasons that we've thought that is, partly older deer die at a higher rate than younger deer. And another part of that equation is CWD, right? CWD is spreading. There are less older deer in cases in some of those circumstances because they're not being managed for, or they shouldn't be managed for, or they're dying at faster rates. And as we're seeing some of these negative challenges to deer occur, and we talk about this in the deer report, this may be the best it's ever going to get. And that's okay. It's part of the decision-making in terms of management.
That's right. And we're at a good place now, which is all the more reason to go hunting every time you get a chance, right?
That's right.
Absolutely. So I tell my wife, that's why I got to go. Might never be this good again. All right. Those 3 regions then, Matt, if we look at total numbers, shot over 2.9 million antlered deer, which we were right at or just slightly above the 5-year antlered buck harvest with that. So pretty cool place to be. And this is our last 20 or dozen seasons relative to buck harvest. And what I want folks to understand is in 2020, look at the number we have here. That was the single highest buck harvest that we had in 21 years. That's a record. That's like a historical high. So this past season was just a little under that, but as you can see, still way above what we've had over this past dozen seasons. So historically high buck harvest. What this means, though, is that in many cases, we are at really, really high deer densities. And in many cases, densities now that are approaching what our habitats can support and surpassing those. So one of the ways that many states monitor deer density is by looking at the buck harvest. And so in many cases, this is suggesting growing deer herds. Now, remember this when we get to the antlerless side, because that's important. So, you know what I love about this picture? besides it's my son and my daughter's dog in this, and a big deer. Look at the smiles. You know what? So many people forget to just smile and realize how much fun hunting is. So purposely use this to show the smiles and remind people, hey, let's have a good time while we're out there. Hunting's a lot of fun. Well, this is the top 5 states for the buck harvest. Texas shot more bucks than anybody else, but it's a big state, right? It's the biggest in the lower 48. They got a lot of deer, a lot of serious deer hunters. So it's pretty cool. But what I want to highlight here is look at this. It is more than twice as much as the next state. And Michigan was number 2 in the country relative to total bucks. So a lot of deer here. But this really doesn't tell the whole story because, you know, a bigger state that has a lot of deer should be shooting the most. So what we also do with this is then take a look at that antlered buck harvest per square mile. This allows us to give a little more apples to apples comparison. And what we saw was that Michigan leads the country, and Michigan typically is right at the top of this with a buck harvest per square mile. So this is 4 antlered bucks harvested per square mile. This is an incredibly high harvest rate. Now, with this, we've been taken to task at times in the past with some state wildlife agencies saying, hey, you always show these top 5 states and say, you know what, these are the best. This is what everybody should aspire to. And what we say is that's not true. We just simply report what it is. And I will let everybody know here, these are really, really high buck harvest rates. This requires an incredible amount of deer. A lot of deer hunters put in a lot of effort to do this. So we're not saying that, hey, yes, you want to be number 1 on this list, but this is a measure of how these states compare to many others in the country. So this doesn't necessarily mean good or bad. This is just simply a number. What we can do then is look at how this compares to the antlerless harvest and then take a look at the age structure of this buck harvest. And that's where we really know, okay, is this symbolizing something that's really good or something that we can improve on? So antlerless harvest, Matt, this is where the rubber really meets the road. We can do all we want from the buck harvest, and certainly deer hunters are all excited about bucks. And I'm the same way. You know what? We don't have to apologize for that. There's nothing wrong with liking bucks and liking antlers. And very healthy bucks with large antlers are a symbol of a good deer management program and symbol of good, healthy habitat. So we don't need to apologize for that. But this is where we can really take a look at a measurement and say, hey, how good of a job are we doing? So the same 3 regions shot just over 2.9 million antlerless deer as well, which again was right at or just slightly above the 5-year antlerless deer harvest average. So a pretty good place to be there. But I showed you that buck harvest graph before. Look how different the antlerless harvest one is. It's not nearly as high, and we don't see those historical highs the last few years. We see big declines from 2012 and 2013. And this is what is jeopardizing many deer management programs today. We got to a point in the late 28 or 2008, 2009, 10, and then 11, 12, 13, where we were harvesting a bunch of antlerless deer. And in many cases, states had balanced a lot of deer herds with a habitat. So the pendulum actually started to swing the other way a little bit, and we didn't need to harvest as many antlerless deer. So, 2014, 2015, we throw in a bad hemorrhagic disease year there. But what we're seeing now is a long-term trend where, hey, we're harvesting way fewer antlerless deer. And in many cases, fewer antlerless deer than antlered bucks. So this is something that we need to reverse now and start increasing this antlerless harvest again, because we have deer herds that are really growing, antlerless harvests that are declining, and now we're starting to get ourselves in a bit of trouble in many states. So this is something that we are really keeping our eye on. And the reason for that comes down to hunter success rates. We know that of all the people that go hunting, in the vast majority of the states, everybody can harvest at least 2 deer. In many cases, you can harvest multiple bucks and multiple antlerless deer. But the reality of it is less than half of all the hunters that go afield shoot a single deer each year. It's only 41%. So you take all the hunters out there, only 4 out of 10 of them are going to kill a single deer. And only about 18% shoot more than 1 deer. And if you're only going to shoot 1, what do most people shoot? They shoot a buck. So that's why we're seeing buck harvest climb, antlerless harvest decline, and why we're seeing population growth, because we just have fewer people shooting antlerless deer today. Fewer hunters on the landscape in many places. So this is where we really need to get hunters back in the game. And hey, we need you to harvest additional antlerless deer. And I think, Matt, the way that we need to solve this is a lot of hunters would be willing to, but they just can't take another deer, or they don't want to process a deer or pay for it, or don't want to put another one in the freezer. Well, we need to provide a good outlet for a bunch of these additional, particularly antlerless deer. And I think we can get hunters to answer the call, harvest those deer, which helps our deer management programs, and then have an outlet to needy families to be able to use that high quality protein. So I think that is how we're really going to solve this issue. All right, let's look at the age structure. So what do we actually have out there? We talked about it for the bucks. For the antlerless deer, take all the antlerless deer, and fawns are thrown into this because they technically, are antlerless. They don't have a certain length of antler. About 20% of all the antlerless deer are fawns. About 20% are 1.5-year-olds. About 20% are 2.5. And then about 40% are 3 or older. So, and we monitor this all the time because by watching this, we can detect trends in fawn recruitment rate increases or decreases based on, fawn crop that's in here. So this is a good way to keep an eye on exactly what is happening. It's a good health index to it. And basically what this shows us is that the average doe age out there is even older than the average buck. The average buck's better than we've been in 150 years, like I said, but the average doe out there is even older. And this just simply comes from how we harvest them. We just harvest bucks at a much higher rate. But from this, we're in a good spot here, very healthy situation. So let's see who's shooting the most antlerless deer. We know Nick gets his group every year with these, but Texas shoots more antlerless deer than everybody else as well. My home state of Pennsylvania is number 2 on here. Pretty proud of that. But just like the bucks, let's take a look at the per square mile estimate and see where this is. And what we see is Keystone State is number 1, Matt, over 5 antlerless deer per square mile. This is an incredibly high harvest rate. So if you take a look at adding the bucks and the antlerless deer in together, actually Pennsylvania harvests more deer per square mile than any state in the country. So, which is pretty cool. And this is something that we maintain, at the top of that level year after year. And in fact, if you look here, the top 3 states, for those of you that are, know a little bit about geography, these are all right together in the mid-Atlantic region. This region is a real sweet spot relative to deer management. Very productive deer herds, a lot of deer hunters, a lot of effort. So a lot of deer hit the ground. But this also comes with a responsibility. If you're in a productive area, you need to be shooting a bunch of antlerless deer. So I'm glad that we do that in Pennsylvania. There's several other states that are extremely productive deer habitat that we should be seen on this top 5 list. And obviously, Matt, we work hard and our branches work hard, and our volunteers to try to convince those state agencies as well as many of the hunters there to take some more antlerless deer. And I know you
that
have
is
been on
crazy.
the forefront of that for a long time.
I mean, it's 9, almost 10 deer per every 640 acres. That and sustain that for an entire state. That's a lot of deer that are shot in the state of Pennsylvania, and some of those other ones as well. It is pretty crazy that it's been like that forever, though.
Yeah, pretty high. It's a good place to live. I'm glad I live here. All right. Hey, there's a good look at NDA staffer. One thing we look at as well, though, Matt, too, is, hey, let's look at harvest per square mile, but then let's look at the antlerless harvest per buck harvest, because this really gives us a measure of, okay, who's really getting after it from the management side and making sure that they stay ahead of that growth curve. And I picked this picture specifically, Matt, because you are a diehard bow hunter. You shoot far more deer every year with your bow than you do with a rifle or a shotgun. And I know we have featured a lot of your bow kills. So I purposely pulled one with you wearing orange. You obviously shot this deer with a firearm, but I know that you do your part to be shooting more than 1 or 2 or 3 deer a year as well, and helping the state of New York.
Yeah, that was an opening day harvest a couple of years ago.
You do look like you had a little more hair there than now, so I figured you were a little bit younger.
I think I was skinnier too.
All right. Hey, this is pretty cool. We get some Southeast states in here now, though. Georgia leads the country from an antlerless harvest per antlered buck harvest standpoint. And so this is a really good measure of deer herd management. You don't necessarily have to be shooting the most bucks per square mile or the most antlerless deer per square mile. Maybe your state just doesn't have that type of productivity, but everybody can be in on this one. And hey, what do we do? How many antlerless deer are we shooting relative to those bucks? Making sure we're doing a good job balancing deer herds with the available habitat. and it's staying ahead of that growth curve. So this is a very, very good table to be on, and all these states should be extremely proud for being on here. All right, so let's put all these together then, just to kind of give you a snapshot of where this past harvest fits in. This is the buck and antlerless deer harvest from 1999 all the way out until now. And you can see back in 99, that was our record buck harvest. So when I said in 2020, that was the highest buck harvest in 21 years, yeah, it's because our historical high before that was all the way back to 99. So, and look at those early, mid 2000 years where incredibly high antlerless harvest. And so 07 is when we had our record antlerless in the total deer harvest. So we need to get back to that. We have as many deer now as we did then. So we could be harvesting a lot more antlerless deer right now than we are. So, we certainly could be having another record harvest here in the very near future.
If you remember back, thinking about the midpoint where you can see things shifted around 14, 15, that was around when hunters started getting pretty loud about harvest decline to the point where they thought the sky was falling, right? These large harvests that were sustained for at least a decade were coming down, 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 and those were the reports. And we ended up around that time holding a couple of symposiums or deer summits to address those issues. Why is the deer harvest coming down? Once you get a chance to look at this though, from like 30,000 foot view, this is not all that different than managing your own property. If you're hunting on a single property or a cooperative where you have neighbors working together, you might shoot the snot out of the does for a few years and you got to back off. I mean, big picture here from a country level, we were shooting lots of does and deer harvests were coming down, and now we're building back up. And the same thing can happen at no matter what the scale or scope. You're never going to hit it exactly right. But this is why it's important to track data and collect harvest data and monitor it, as you're always trying to catch up with the curve.
That's right. That's why we watch what's going on so closely and adjust each year, and why we talk about, the biologically appropriate antlerless harvest. So very good.
Exactly.
All right. If we put this all together, then, man, it was an incredibly productive deer season. Hunters shot over 5.9 million whitetails, which I like to think about this from a food end. That's about 1.2 billion high quality venison meals. So think about that. As hunters, we eat a lot of this, but we don't eat all of this. We share a lot of this with friends and family and soup kitchens and churches and needy families and that. And this is something as hunters we need to be extremely proud of and talk a little more about. We feed society in many cases, or at least a lot of it. So 1.2 billion high quality meals a year that we're providing. That's pretty cool, and something we need to talk about a little bit more. All right, well, let's take a look, Matt, at how we actually shot those deer. Now we know kind of where we were shooting a bunch and, were they bucks or were they does. But let's look at what seasons we were taking these in. And essentially, we know that about 2/3 of all those deer we took during a firearm season, either with a rifle or a shotgun. About a quarter of them we took with a bow or a crossbow, and about 9% of them with a muzzleloader. And we have been monitoring this for a long time as well. And this has been pretty stable for about the past decade. 15 years ago, the bow harvest only accounted for about 15% of the total deer harvest, but that jumped to about a quarter. 15, maybe getting close to 20 years ago now. And it stayed pretty much right there. So this is a very stable, and this is a great opportunity. It means hunters are taking advantage of the longer seasons, more opportunities, spending more time in the woods earlier in the year as well as later in the year. So this is a good thing. I like to see this very, very healthy situation for us. Private land deer harvest. This is a new category for us this year. We know that certainly private land is very important. We know much of the country is in private land ownership, but we have never taken a look at exactly what percentage of our deer harvest occurs on private land as opposed to public land. And what we found is that, man, about 9 out of 10 whitetail shot are shot on private land. And in fact, I'm going to give a total talk on this next week at the Southeast Deer Study Group meeting, the largest deer biologist meeting of the year. So we have some really cool data on this that kind of talks about this, and just it shows the importance of private land. But yeah, 88% of all the deer are taken. This ranges from 57% of the harvest in Massachusetts on private land up to almost every single deer in the state of Texas, taken on private land. If you look at this regionally, in the Northeast, 81% of all the deer shot were taken on private land. Midwest is a bit higher at 91%, and the Southeast is even higher at 93%. None of the states in the Western U.S. record this data. They don't report whether it's in a private or public land standpoint. Certainly way more public land in the West, but they don't have this. However, somebody might say, well, if you threw all the Western harvest in, this may change. The reality is it wouldn't, because we shot about 5.2 million deer on private land last year. The entire deer harvest in the whole West is only about 250,000 animals. So it's a fraction of what it is everywhere else. So even if the West did record this data, we'd still be at a really high percentage here on private land. All right, with that then, Matt, let's shift from the harvest end and just get into some more of the bigger issues or trends that we're seeing nationally. Certainly disease is always an issue. Very quickly with this one, hemorrhagic disease last year, 24 states confirmed this, and this put it at a moderate year. Now, if you were in places in Ohio, Kentucky, Indiana, you may say, moderate, heck, it was terrible, because there certainly were localized areas that lost a lot of deer, but across the country, it was labeled as a moderate year, and found this in about half the states. CWD is now in 30 states, 5 provinces, and a few foreign countries. It continues to spread and expand its range. Obviously, we're at the forefront of this fight, and many NDA members engage in that. So we work hard every day to try to limit the spread of this. But there's other things that affect deer as well. Tuberculosis, and although this isn't a disease, lungworms and ticks, and even SARS-CoV-2, and this is in the press a lot. So I threw this one in here just so folks know, there's actually a lot of things that can impact deer. We don't see a whole bunch of animals dying or being afflicted by any of these other things, but there's quite a few different things that we do see that impact some deer every year, and last year was no exception. Let's take a look at deer numbers. We know that about 9 million deer hunters went afield last year. Any given year, there's somewhere between 9 and 11 million deer hunters in the U.S. This ranges from about 5,000 in Rhode Island up to 750,000 in Texas. So a pretty broad range there. And of those, about 22% of them hunt with a muzzleloader. About twice that many hunt with either a bow or a crossbow, and about twice that many hunt with a firearm. So certainly firearms are the most preferred, but it's kind of fun now to take a look at these percentages and then compare them to the percentage of the total deer harvest with these different weapon types. And what it shows here is that some people just want the opportunity to spend more time afield in these other seasons. So if you remember, only 9% of the total harvest was with a muzzleloader, but yet about 22% of all deer hunters actually go muzzleloader hunting each year, which is a good thing. You don't have to kill a deer to have fun while you're out there. Texas has the most deer hunters, as we said. The actual number is just over 756,000. But my home state of PA has the most per square mile, 14.5 deer hunters per square mile. So, we talk about there being a deer behind every tree, or we wish there was a deer behind every tree, and there's certainly not. But man, at times it feels like there's a deer hunter behind every tree when we're out there. Massachusetts has the highest percentage of muzzleloader hunters. 70% of the deer hunters in Massachusetts hunt with a muzzleloader, or at least buy a muzzleloader stamp or license. Illinois has the highest percentage of archery hunters from their total deer hunters. And then we had a whole bunch of states that said that reported that 100% of their deer hunters actually hunt with a firearm. So that's a pretty high number. Let's shift gear to a deer competitor. Feral hogs, and we learned that 23 states have feral hogs. Those are the ones that you see here in green. The ones in blue said that they don't have them. A couple states there in white, California and Colorado, said that they didn't provide us this data. But just as I said, I'm going to be giving a talk at the Deer Study Group meeting next week on private land harvest. Our own Ben Westfall, our conservation coordinator, he's giving a talk there on feral hogs, use, impacts on deer programs, feral hog task forces, etc., across the U.S. So going to be a super cool talk, and maybe we'll have him on a webinar here at some point to give that as well, to share a little more information. But man, hogs are big trouble. They can be huge trouble. We know that they cause about $2 billion in damages annually. This is ag damage, forest damage, food plot damage, etc. 8 of the states that have them said that they negatively impact their deer management programs. I'm actually a little surprised by this. I thought this would be a lot higher. I certainly expected, I know that there's more damage than this in some of these. We know that they directly compete with deer for food and resources and cover. But anyway, 8 states said they negatively impact them. And fortunately, there's only 3 states that still allow you to legally move live hogs from one place to another, catch them, trailer them somewhere else and release them. It's a lot of fun to catch hogs and hunt them this way, but not wise for deer or other wildlife to be moving them and reintroducing them in these other areas. And only 3 states allow it. And I'm guessing that at some point in the future, this will be down to 0, given all the problems that hogs cause. We also asked, hey, do you calculate a target buck harvest going into the season? This is kind of like a plan for the season. 5 states do, the ones that you see here in green. So they go have, okay, this is about how many bucks we would like our hunters to take based on where the deer herd is relative to goals. So this is nice to see. And I vividly remember being New Hampshire's deer biologist and calculating this each year. But a more important question with this is from the antlerless side. Do you calculate a target antlerless harvest? I do this every year on our farm. I know you've helped a lot of people do this, Matt, and I'm glad to see a bunch of states do it. 10 states do this. This is a biological plan for the deer season. How many does do we need to take to meet our harvest goals and our harvest objectives, keep the deer herd where it needs to be? From that, they allocate a certain amount of tags to try to be able to hit that. So this is awesome. I wish every state out there was doing this. I'm glad to see the 10 are, and man, I'd love to see this number increase in the future. And I know you're a big proponent of this as well.
This was a surprising statistic for me. There's a couple, but this is one of the bigger ones from this year's report where I thought that number was going to be higher for the antlerless target anyway, not necessarily from the buck side. It does seem like it might be a little bit regional, a little bit stronger to the Northeast. Although New Hampshire does not say that they calculate an antlerless harvest, but they do a buck harvest, which from a northern New England population, I think that's probably why, just because they're regulating based on buck tags versus antlerless tags, just because opportunity isn't quite the same. But still, I thought this number would have been higher.
Yeah, me too. And I was surprised with New Hampshire because when I was there, we did calculate a target antlerless harvest as well. So yeah, I think it's just at such low deer densities in parts of that state that they're probably, well, it's not nearly as much needed there as a bunch of other states that have higher productivity deer herds. So, but pretty cool. And I know there's some state wildlife agencies that were really interested in this question and in seeing this map. We asked states, hey, what are some of the top management issues you're dealing with? And very specifically, we did not say what are the top 2 or the top 3. We just said, what are some of the top ones? And partly because, they don't have to say this is number 1, this is number 2, based on the amount of time we spend on this or, or money spent. So, hey, what are the biggest issues? Well, the top 3 by far were CWD or disease, hunter access, and declining deer numbers. If we take a look at the number of states here, CWD was by far bigger than everything else. Over half of the states. Hunter access was next. And you can see that's less than half of the states that claimed CWD or disease were. And then declining hunter numbers were right there as well. Again, you can go to the deer report and see exactly how your state answered this and all the state by state numbers. But these were the biggest 3 in summation across the whitetails range. We also took a look at it and asked, hey, what percentage of your state is forested and what percentage is in ag production? Because this really plays into what we see from a deer harvest end, from a hunter opportunity end, or even some cases, just how many hunters, a state can really handle before they really start impacting each other in the deer harvest. Well, the Southeast on average was 50% forested and about 1/3 in agricultural production. The Northeast was a little more forested, a little less in ag. The Midwest, as you would imagine, about half as much forest and a lot more ag. And then the West was a little bit in between. And now with this, I will say from the ag end, that's not just row crops. That's any agricultural production from a crop end, not livestock. So it could be corn, soybeans, sorghum, could be alfalfa. So anyway, it's not just a row crop thing. Could be wheat, certainly the upper Midwest, the plain states anyway, lots of wheat. So, but this is how it shook out. Oh, and if we look, oh, guess my computer's ready to be done, Matt. If we take a look at the states that had the highest percentage of forested land, Maine was number one. The vast majority of that state's forested. As you can see, actually, there's 3 states here in New England in the top 5. The flip side of this, the highest percentage of agricultural production, and I have a picture of soybean field here, but this could easily be alfalfa or wheat. North Dakota was the highest. Very rural state, lot of agricultural production. You know, number 1 state for wheat, a lot of sugar beets, corn, soybeans. They grow a little bit of everything there. But a bunch of Midwest states here and even a couple Western states sneaking in on this one. So that's pretty cool. So to kind of give us a feel. Now you can take this then and go compare this to the deer harvest. And, you know, just look at bucks harvested per square mile and antlerless deer and all of that. And it gives you a better picture of really what's going on within any given state. So it's pretty neat to be able to monitor. The last thing then from this part of it is a mule deer harvest. The states that you see here are the ones that have mule deer populations that they manage with hunting. All the Western states, 4 of the Midwest states, and then 2 here in the Southeast. And with this one, Montana shoots more antlered or mule deer bucks than any other state. But these are all pretty close here relative to the top 5. But take a look at how different these numbers are from the top 5 whitetail states. Mule deer just exist at entirely different densities, far, far lower densities than whitetails do. And in many cases here, just way lower hunter densities as well. When we look at this from a per square mile harvest as well, and Oregon is number 1 at about 1/3 of a mule deer buck per square mile. Remember here where Pennsylvania was at the top of the whitetail at over 5. So just highlights how different those species are relative to numbers on the landscape, productivity, and just availability for harvest. So, but these are the top 5 states from the mule deer buck harvest per square mile. So with that, we'll end here with a little bit of trivia from my end, and then I know you have a trivia question for the folks. So take a look at all the states out there relative to total deer harvest. What state shoots a higher percentage of their total deer harvest with a bow or crossbow? And obviously you see a crossbow here, Matt. This is my new buddy, Keith. This is a brand new hunter on one of our Field to Fork events last year in Pennsylvania. This is Keith's very first deer that I was honored to be sitting with him with and helping talk him through all of this. So I'm proud to be in that. And I challenge everybody here tonight, and then go back and challenge all of your hunt buddies to take somebody new to the woods with you this fall as well. This was one of my best hunts of the year for sure. And you can have the same, and it depends on it. It's our responsibility today to be able to do that. But from a bow end, New Jersey kills about 2/3 of all their deer with a bow. But think about this. It's the Garden State, is the most populated state, you know, very little area that you can get away from a bunch of people, a lot of firearm ordinances. So a lot of really good bow hunting opportunities there. Well, from a muzzleloader end, the state that tops this list here is Rhode Island. Part of the reason here is because that's one of the single best opportunities they have to be able to shoot a doe is with a muzzleloader. So that's one of the reasons that about half of all their deer taken are taken with a muzzleloader. So some of what we're seeing here is you know, a lot about opportunity with these, as opposed to maybe not as much with some other firearms. But a bunch of New England states on this list. And then lastly, from a firearm, either a rifle or a shotgun, here's where the Western states really get into this. So there's clearly bow hunting that goes on in the West, but firearms reign supreme for sure. And it's almost always a Western state that's number 1 here. And it doesn't surprise me that Western states are the top 3 out of the 5 and have 4 of the top 5 in total for this one. So with that, all of that, as I said, is in here. This is all of our deer reports. They're all on our website, free downloads for these, so folks can go back and grab them. Everyone is different. Obviously, they have different harvest years in them, but the issues, the trends, and all that change each year. So you can go back and grab any of these and learn a little more about what's going on in your state, kind of how that compares to your neighbors or others in the region. So we had a picture of some smiling hunters at the beginning. I'm going to end with some smiling hunters because I'm the first to say hunting is fun. We want to keep the fun in hunting. So I use this, Matt, to encourage everybody to do that. So, and with that, how about I stop sharing my screen here? You take a look, looks like we have a bunch of questions. I knew we
We
had some
do.
others that were emailed in before as well. So, yeah, let's take some questions and, hopefully there's some good ones here.
Great job as always. Yeah, let's just jump right in with the first question, Kip. I'll ask you to answer this one, and then I'll take the next one. We'll kind of go back and forth, and there'll be some in here that maybe Nick can answer as well. So the first one is talking specifically about Maryland, but I think the question could pertain to any state that's seen a massive increase in harvest. The question is something along the lines of, back in the 70s, they used to kill about 10,000 deer a year. Now it's over 70,000 deer a year. What would do that? What would make a state change that much in about 30 to 50 years? Just be able to increase 700%.
Yeah, from that time frame and knowing where that is, it's partly more deer in some parts of the state, but partly is this hunters are far more likely today to be shooting deer than many cases we were back then from the antlerless side. Remember at that point, in much of the Northeast, well, much of the country, but especially the Northeast, it was buck harvest only. So, antlerless harvest likely constituted a very small percentage of that. So I know I'm able to take my son to Maryland each year bow hunting, and he kills multiple deer while we're there. So there's a lot of deer in that state, a lot of antlerless deer, highly productive in parts of it. So I think there's just a lot of deer in the landscape, and the DNR today provides tremendous opportunities and very liberal opportunities in much of it to shoot them. So I think that's probably what's going on there.
Good job. Next question. What is the best way to promote better engagement with DMAP? So DMAP stands for Deer Management Assistance Program. It's about over 20 states in the U.S. Have a DMAP program. And in fact, I think it was last year's report that we asked that question and compared it to about a decade earlier. There's more states that offer DMAP today than in the past. We have lots of information on our website about DMAP, including some videos. I think one of the best ways to do it, honestly, for the person that asked that, is working with your neighbors through a cooperative, getting neighbors involved to manage at a larger scale than a single property. You can form a formal cooperative to do that. In a lot of states, there are acreage requirements that you need to meet, and a lot of single landowners don't have that ability or will hit that scale or threshold. And so just working with your neighbors to manage deer populations, collect deer harvest data, you're more likely to be able to show the need to and be able to utilize those extra tags. Those are property specific antlerless tags to be used during the deer season. And so at least in the Northeast, in my experience, that's one of the best ways to better find engagement with DMAP.
Good job.
How about the next question? What can we do about EHD?
With that one, EHD can be terrible. Luckily, it's often localized, so it doesn't affect everybody in the state. The biggest and most important thing we can do there is, if it does hit your area and you know that it's there, we can adjust our antlerless harvest in that year, if necessary, to account for that. In many cases, if the deer herd is a little bit high anyway, it's a bad way to look at it, but if we're losing some deer, it can actually help us. But there's nothing that we can do to stop it. It's the midge, that carries it. The one thing we can try to do is, not have a bunch of mud flats around, those muddy areas. That's perfect breeding ground for midges. So from a habitat end, we can try to eliminate that type of stuff. But from a hunting end, single best thing is, hey, let's just adjust antlerless harvest if necessary. And the fortunate thing is, if it hits an area bad one year, it very rarely hits that bad for a long time after that. There are exceptions, but for the most part, it's a 1 year thing and gone. So adjust if necessary, and try to get rid of any mud.
That's good. And actually, the next question has to do with pond preference or water preference by deer. Kip just answered a little bit of that in terms of being careful with having too muddy of an area or resource for deer with EHD. I don't know of any research for the person that asked the question that in terms of water preference. People would be surprised that deer utilization of water outside of the extreme south central part of the U.S., South Texas, parts of the south western U.S., most deer will utilize open water, free water just to drink, but it's not the main way that they get water. The main way that they actually consume or use water is through the food they eat. Where you have normal rainfall, which is the majority of the country, that's how they get water in their system. And when things are in a drought condition or if it's frozen, they can actually recycle water in their body through metabolic means. So having open water sources are good. There are risks with EHD and some other things, but just managing a very forb-rich, meaning like herbaceous plants that don't have a lot of woody material. If you have lots of forbs that are available to deer when green plants are growing, they're going to get a lot of water through that. And so but I don't know of any research in terms of preference of pond size or whether or not there's debris in it.
If that guy's from Kansas, man, I don't know who that was. Last year, Kansas was in like 100-year record droughts. A bunch of that part of the country was just unbelievably dry. And I know there was a lot of folks trying to either put in wells for deer, cattle troughs, that type of thing. So if he is from that part of the world, if it is that dry, if any opportunity you have to have moving water is better for deer than stagnant water. Not that, I think deer probably prefer it a little more, but certainly from a midge end and just a mosquito end, anything that's moving is just higher quality water in general. So if you have the ability to do that for deer, that is definitely preferred.
We're coming down to the end of the hour. I'm going to give you a twofer that are basically the same question. How do you know the deer ages that were shot? My state just asked for antler size. And how is the age data collected? What method is used to find ages of deer? So you talked about age structure for the national harvest. How's that collected?
Great questions. Most states don't ask hunters what the age of the deer is, but nearly every state will go and collect some of that data after the fact. They visit meat processors, they visit taxidermists, some have people send teeth in. So they don't get them from all the deer. They get a subset of the deer harvest. And then from that, they collect a high enough percentage that they can then extrapolate to what the total age structure would be. So that's how they get it. And there's been a lot of research to look at that shows that the states that do that, it's very, very accurate. If you're not a statistician, it's kind of hard to understand or sometimes, but from our end of it, we've seen what the science says and what the data says, and states do a darn good job being able to estimate what the actual age structure is. So, but great questions.
Yeah, I know we're almost at the end, but there's a couple really good questions here. There's one pertaining to CWD that I'll throw it up for either you or Nick. What's our perspective in terms of good deer management and harvest of young bucks as it pertains to CWD? What's our viewpoint on that?
That's a super question. You know what? We certainly recognize that older bucks are more likely to have the disease than younger bucks or does. And on paper, the best way to fight the disease is have a very low density deer herd that's very young, no older bucks, no older does, and just real low density. But the reality is that's not the real world. What works on paper doesn't necessarily work in the real world. So what we look at is, hey, it takes hunters to implement a plan, a disease management plan. So we want to harvest antlerless deer, keep deer herds, in check. We don't want deer herds to, even the buck side, to, be extremely advanced on the age structure, but we're realists. We recognize that if there are no older bucks out there, a lot of hunters just simply aren't willing to hunt. They don't hunt as long. They don't spend as much on hunting equipment. So they don't, contribute to wildlife management, and they often then don't shoot antlerless deer. So it's our organization's standpoint that, hey, we think it's better to have some of those older bucks out there to keep hunters engaged and to keep hunting, and keep pumping money into the system. So it's not perfect by any means. We get it, but we think it's the best shot that we got in the real world to limit the spread of the disease.
Just add to that briefly. I've heard many people say we need to focus harvest on older age class deer. Yeah, we all want to shoot the older age class deer, but it's easier said than done. And in a lot of ways, we are focusing the harvest on the older age class deer, and I think we're doing the best we can. And in the meantime, while we're pursuing the older age class deer, which I understand, again, Kip said on paper that works, but the deer that aren't older age class are becoming older age class while we're trying to chase the older age class deer. So you see where you just sort of keep chasing your tail on that. I think it's a great question, Eric. It's one that we've addressed and dealt with many, many times, and we wish we had the perfect answer, but I think that's about the best we can do.
I also think it shows the true core of our organization is we are here for the deer, the health of the herd. And we've changed some of the tunes that we've said before because of the way the science shows, and we're always going to be science-based. And I'm proud to be part of an organization that is okay changing, the message because of, a concern like this. Let's do one last question, folks. Don't jump off. I'm going to give away a prize right after this last question. But Josh asks, in an age where hunter numbers are reportedly declining and state buck bag limits increasingly are decreasing, what's the explanation for near record harvest levels? So shooting a lot of deer, but apparently we're hearing that there's less hunters. Why? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that's because we do have some fewer hunters. We have very high deer populations. So there's a lot of bucks available for harvest. And then we just have so many people that will shoot that one deer and be done, and they're shooting bucks. So there's more bucks on the landscape because we're not harvesting as many antlerless deer. People shooting one and they end up hitting those. So anyway, that's the reason for it, and well, just look at states like Michigan that shoot 4 bucks per square mile. I mean, that is just crazy high. We have enough hunters in places like Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, and elsewhere that we just flood the woods, with hunters. And so a lot of bucks on the landscape, and we're good at shooting them.
Good answer.
I would just say organizationally too, we're looking very closely at antlerless harvests across the country, and there are some concerns, some things to be concerned about there. You saw the statistic that 41% of hunters shoot just a single deer, and as Kip had said earlier, that's usually a one and done on a buck. And then for people to shoot more than one deer is 18%. I've shot 6 deer this past season, and 5 of them were antlerless. I would say that I'm probably within like a 2 or 3% of the people that did that. And we need more people to do that, frankly. So stay tuned for more from us on antlerless deer harvest.
All right, we're at the end of the hour, so we're going to give away the prize. The prize is a hard copy of the Deer Report for 2023. They're at the printer now. We haven't even gotten our hands on it, but once they show up, you'll get one of the very first copies. So what you're going to do is in the chat, not the Q&A, right? So in the chat feature, the first person that types this answer in, I'll be able to scroll up and down and find the correct answer. And the first person that types it in will get a copy of the Deer Report. Before I read the question and see what the answer is, want to just appreciate everybody's attention and attendance tonight. If you're not an NDA member, of course, we want you to join NDA. Certainly, we do a lot for deer hunters, and we need your support. And so, any last words, Kip or Nick, before I read the trivia?
I just want to plug is I agree, Matt. Nobody fights harder for deer or deer hunters than NDA. So if you enjoy this type of stuff, if you like deer, we're where you need to be, and we'd love to have you be a part of us.
Yeah, and reach out to us directly. I just put my email in the chat, but our emails are simple. It's just our first name at deerassociation.com. Please don't be shy. We want to answer your questions, and if you didn't get your question answered here, please reach out. Thank you for being here.
Yep, and we have lots of free resources. We put out a newsletter every Thursday. Should have gotten it this morning if you're a member, and you can sign up for those as well. All right, so here's the question. First person that types it in to the chat will get the hard copy of the Deer Report. So Kip reported that 40% of the antlered buck harvest in 2021 was comprised of 3.5 or older bucks, so that older age class, which is an amazing statistic. What percent of the antlerless harvest was the same age class, 3.5 years or older in 2021? So what percent of the antlerless harvest? There's already a right answer. It looks like Dwayne, it has been a long time since I've seen that name, said 41%. That's correct. 41% of the antlerless harvest was 3.5 years and older. So Dwayne, I don't even know if I still have your address. Send me an email at matt@deerassociation.com. Be good to catch up. You'll get a hard copy of the 2023 Deer Report. So thank you, everybody. We hope you enjoyed the presentation and entertainment. And we'll see you at the next one, right?
Sounds good.
good
Great
evening.
job, Matt, Nick. Good to see everybody. Have a safe
Thank
night.
you.